Welcome to the Beers with Engineers podcast. It's time for a pint of fun and a shot of geek. My name is Bert and this is episode number 7. My guest today is Jeff Turk, and the title is We Can't All Be Engineers. Jeff is a little different from my previous guests, but before getting to him, how about a little about me? It is my podcast after all. So my company is Dexterity Engineering, and I do contract product development for medical devices and consumer products, specializing in plastic part design. Please go to my website, dexterityeng.com, to learn more. To learn more about Jeff Turk, listen to the rest of this podcast. The big secret about him is revealed right away, so I won't tell you just yet. I've known Jeff since 1996, and we had a fun conversation that could have gone on a lot longer. We mostly talk about a topic engineers, and probably most people, do not enjoy: job hunting and interviewing. Wait a minute, so what does that say about us if we have fun talking about something that people don't like? I guess that's something for me and my therapist to talk about next. Anyways, please don't let that turn you off. We share some interesting stories and some good advice on getting through an interview and to a job offer. With that said, let's begin. Jeff, thank you for making time for this conversation. How are you doing today?
Great, Bert. It's so good to see you and great to talk to you today.
All right. So I have known Jeff for over 25 years, but instead of my normal introduction about how we know each other, I'm going to make this episode legitimate as a Beers with Engineers episode, plural, as opposed to a Beers with Engineer singular podcast. Now you may be wondering why I'm saying this. Well, Jeff probably has more engineers in his LinkedIn network than many or most engineers do, but he is not an engineer. Shock. Jeff is a recruiter, and he helped me get a job back in 1996. So to get things on the up and up, I'm going to use the powers that I have vested in myself and grant Jeff Turk an honorary degree in engineering from the Beers with Engineers University. Congratulations,
Thank you, Bert.
Jeff. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's great to be here and great to have that honorarium.
So if you're lucky, maybe I'll take 5 minutes and slap together a diploma and send it to you.
Okay.
All right, so there it is. So the cat's out of the bag. Jeff is not an engineer, but he may be somewhat of an engineer just through osmosis of talking with engineers so much. So the way we typically start this thing is we ask, how did you become an engineer? Why are you an engineer? So I'm going to ask, how did you become a recruiter? Why are you a recruiter?
Well, and that's good. And I'm going to also seg into my engineering expertise.
All right.
So I graduated college at a time when it was really difficult to get jobs in human resources, which my degree was in business with a human resources specialization.
Okay.
My first job out of college was not living up to what the expectation should have been or was when I joined the organization. That was with a company called Rehearse, which was not only the rental car business, but also in construction equipment. And I'll age myself a little in that they were owned by a corporation called RCA, which nobody hears about anymore. But RCA also owned NBC, National Broadcast Corporation.
Okay.
And that, at the particular time, was bleeding a lot of money from the company. NBC was not doing well. And so they put Hertz on the block to sell 6 weeks into my job. And just everything that should have materialized didn't. And so I was really frustrated. At the same time, I had a friend from high school who was a year older than me, and he worked for a recruiting firm. And I ran into him maybe 10 weeks on my job when I realized 6 weeks in, it was really not going to materialize the way it should have. And said something to him. And he's like, you know what? Give it a year. We'll be able to help you then. And I was like, oh, gosh, I have to stick this out this long. But yes, go ahead, Bert.
Quick question. So was it the company situation that you knew was bad so quickly, or the job position itself, or a little of both?
It was the company coupled with the person that I reported to who could have and should have been mentoring me, was just frustrated every single day. And I think really was feeling enormous pressure. And looking back on it, came in frustrated every day and just really created a negative work environment.
Yep.
Yeah, I could do the job that they had, but it also, I didn't see where it was going to lead anywhere. But I mean, he was miserable every single day.
Mm.
And I didn't realize it at the time, but you could just feel the negative energy.
Yeah, yeah, it's not good.
It's not. So anyway, 9 months later, which I thought was close enough to a year, I reached back out to my buddy and said, could we start to work together now? And that's how naive I was. And he was like, no, you really need to give it a year. And I was like, okay. And then a month and a half later, he called me and said that his firm was expanding. And knowing my background, he thought I might be a good candidate to work for their recruiting firm.
Good.
And so I appreciated that. I wasn't sure that's what I wanted, but I did interview and I was impressed with the work they were doing. I was impressed with their style. And I thought at the very least, it would give me experience to maybe in a backdoor way work in human resources in a company.
Okay.
And the very first day I started, and it was really on the job training, I was told, oh, you're going to be working with mechanical engineers, and that's what you're going to specialize in. Here's a person who has contacted us. We want you to find him a job. And to be very frank, and to all your engineer friends out there and listeners, I didn't know what a mechanical engineer was.
Fair enough.
So I had to educate myself really, really quickly.
Sure.
And I did. And I also listened a lot. And I spoke to companies in the area that had engineering needs and heard what their needs were. And the very first person that they gave me, I was able to get him an interview within 2 days, which I was really proud of.
Yeah.
And then almost immediately he told me, no, that wasn't what he was interested in. And then as we talked a little bit more, it appeared to me that he really wasn't interested at all, but just wanted to see maybe what was out in the marketplace. But I'd also talked to somebody else in the meantime who was looking for a job. And I'm in Charlotte. It happened he was coming to Charlotte, and that's where he wanted to live. And so, it was X number of companies. He had his background in mechanical engineering, and specifically his area of expertise and interest was in fluid mechanics. Mm-hmm. And so I've researched all the companies that were in fluid mechanics and spoke to a director of engineering at one of those companies who was like, yes, we have a need. And I set him up, and he interviewed like 2 days later, was offered the job the very next day, and started 2 weeks later. And so that helped me get the ball rolling.
Interesting.
And it gave me the both the confidence, but also the I don't want to say luxury, but really it gave me a luxury in that I knew now what matched him up with another place, and I could transfer somebody else's skills. It didn't necessarily have to be fluid mechanics, but I saw what the template was.
Right.
And so I just studied a lot of what mechanical engineers do and what subspecialties were, but also knew to probe with hiring companies. Now, what is the expertise you're looking for? Mm-hmm. And what would your flexibilities be?
Okay.
And it was, it was a work in progress, because sometimes I thought I understood it, and then, would find out, no, that they weren't quite as flexible as they said. But you could tell where they were positively responding.
Okay. So you've already answered one of my next questions, which I don't know what that question was. So a little more into our background. So I actually first heard your name back in '93 when we had layoffs, and the gentleman Roger Hildwine, who we knew layoffs were coming, and he said something to the effect of, "If I get laid off, the first thing I'm going to do is call Jeff Turk." And so I made a mental note of that name. I don't think I called you then because I ended up getting laid off, but I chose to, instead of work, took a year, which turned into 2 years off, to do some volunteer work in Kentucky, which worked out very nicely. I helped some people get the GEDs, and I found myself a wife. So,
That worked out
ironically, it
really
was
well for you.
right. Not a nice Kentucky lady. She was a nice Long Island lady,
Okay.
and we're married 26 years now. But at the towards the end of my time, when I said, "All right, I'm going to go back into the engineering world," the name Jeff Turk was still in my brain, and so I gave you a call. And a few months later, I got a job in New Jersey with Becton Dickinson.
Yes.
And what I remember telling people at the time, and I later came to doubt this for a variety of reasons, I'm not sure exactly why, but is that my understanding of recruiters, headhunters, whatever you want to call them at the time, was that a company would come to them and say, find me a person for this job. And so kind of like the recruiter was a client of the company. And what I believed, and it sort of sounds like it's true, correct me if I'm wrong, was that in some respects, I was a client of yours. Because you were working for the employee, potential employee. And part of what made me think that was just a misunderstanding on my part was, well, that doesn't make sense because I didn't pay you anything.
Well,
And so I guess maybe clarify that, elaborate on that a little bit if you would for me.
so I'll talk about for me, and I can't really speak for every
Okay, sure.
every recruiter. And
Sure.
What you said is correct to a point. The company does pay a fee to me to find people that they can't necessarily find on their own. But at the same time, if I don't treat you as a candidate like a client, I'm not setting you up for success, which doesn't
Okay.
set me up for success, nor does it set the company who pays the fee up for success either.
Right.
So I think it's a delicate balance, but I treat both parties as clients.
Okay. So then,
Just one's a paying client and one isn't.
well, right. And I guess,
But one's a payoff client,
right. So you talked about that first client, an engineer
Yes.
who you first tried to
Well,
find a job
candidate,
for.
yes.
And you said you called companies to try and find a job for him or her, whichever. No, these were companies so you were working for some firm at the time.
Well, yes.
Okay, so, A1 Recruiting, a placement agency, we'll call it that the name. So did they have a name of, all right, Jeff, here's the 14 companies that we have relationships with, you call them, or you went to
No. In fact, although they did have a modest relationship, it wasn't really what I would call a existing relationship. I helped open that door a little bit further.
Okay.
And so that is something else that, as a recruiter, that I do. Not every company that I have a previous relationship with is a company that I have placed a candidate at. I've sometimes placed candidates with new clients, and that by representing the engineer, that opened up the door.
So then so let's say I said, hey, Jeff, I need a job. So you've got your list of, X companies, but you do some research and say, hey, here's a company that I don't have a relationship with that I think Bert would be a great fit for. So you call them up and say, I've got a candidate, I'm a recruiter.
Right, and I'm representing a candidate with maybe, say, XXX and X background.
I guess I'm just curious about, not the exact details, but the financial aspect of it. So then, unless they agree to give you something, you're not going to give them my name, and I'm just curious how that works.
Right. Well, then, move on, and I would probably tell you, well, I couldn't get you in this, but if you want to explore something.
Okay.
There you could.
All right. So then, at the very least, I know you dinner.
Right.
Or something like that. Okay. No,
I'm still waiting.
Well,
not from you, but there's plenty of others.
Okay. So do you recall, in my case with Becton Dickinson, was that...
I did have an existing...
Did have a relationship with Lauren. Okay. Not that it's terribly important, just one of the things very often I preface questions with, I'm just curious, and that appears to be
So
a trait
it is
of my
funny because
family.
it is, how long ago was it? That's almost...
Pushing 30 years.
Yeah,
26,
almost.
27 years.
So Now, correct me because I'm going to throw a name out, and am thinking that's who you may have reported to or worked with. Luciano Giambattista was
Just Lucio. I don't think it's Luciano, but that is correct. Yeah,
Lucio
Lucio.
Giambattista.
Yep.
Okay, it's been a long, long time, but yes, I had
Well,
a relationship.
I was looking at your LinkedIn, and we have three common contacts: Roger Hildwine, who I mentioned,
Yes,
Lucio, who you just mentioned, and a third, who was my boss a few years ago, Philip Walker.
yes,
Do you remember Philip?
I do remember Philip.
Okay, so that was a very interesting interview that I had with him because had been working at a company called Radius, left to
Yes,
do some other things, and was looking to go back to Radius, and still do lots of people, and I left on good terms. And coincidentally, at the same time, they were hiring a new director of engineering. So they said to themselves, "Well, we can't really hire this guy to start when we've got a new director of engineering starting in 2 days. We really should have him interview him." So his first day on the job, he interviews me, and I'm not sure exactly the situation, but I'm guessing they said, "Yeah, he worked here before, but we wanted to make sure you talk to him." And what's he going to say? "Boy, that guy was terrible. He's awful.
right.
Why'd you hire him in the first place 10 years ago?" So it just was a strange interview, and I've kept in touch with Philip over the years on a conversation or on a call, but that was just a strange interview, and
That is, and there's
yeah,
the circumstances of that are unique.
yeah,
You probably wouldn't ever replicate that kind of
yeah, not likely,
interview
not
again.
likely.
But
So,
hey,
so
I do want your listeners to know something, and
yes.
because I have known you, and we've stayed in contact throughout the years, and though I'm surprised we only have three LinkedIn contacts in
I was a
common
little
because it
surprised.
should be more.
Yeah.
Your reputation is exceptional. And throughout the entire time I've known you, you've had a great reputation from
Well, thank
people
you.
who have worked with you and people who have gotten to know you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're
The
welcome.
other very interesting thing about our relationship is we have never met face to face. And
This is the first time I'm seeing you live, and
well, right, and I hadn't
we're
even seen
Facebook
him.
friends, we're LinkedIn connections, we
Uh,
talk regularly.
yeah, I had no idea what you looked like till we became Facebook friends.
Yeah.
It's very odd. So it's 26, 27 years we've known each other without ever meeting. And I'm going to throw you under the bus here a little bit. Is your
Uh-oh.
in-laws are in Worcester, right?
Yes. Yes. My
We're in Worcester.
mother-in-law has
Okay,
passed
so
away.
you've been
Yes.
up. You're 10 miles away from me, 15 miles away,
Yes.
and never once said, "Hey, Bert, let's go have a beer together."
My father-in-law is still there, so I'm going to try
Okay.
to correct that.
All right. All right.
But
Next time
yes,
you're up, I want a phone call.
we've reminisced about that, and
Yeah.
I know last year we were close to meeting. I think you were passing through the Charlotte airport,
I had
and we
time to come up
talked.
to the
And
airport.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right. All right. Well, you know, there's this part of me that doesn't want to actually meet you because then I can keep up my longest person I've known without ever meeting a
I
record.
remember
But
that.
that's just a small part of me, which the
Well, but let's try to correct that. Let me make it like that you've gone 27, 8 years without
exactly,
meeting me.
exactly. So, all right, I get contacts from, well, I have on my LinkedIn page that I'm looking for work. My situation is I'm self-employed, contracting, but if the right job comes on along, I will bite on it. Not too many good jobs come along. It's really frustrating because I'll get jobs for software and electrical engineers, and it's like, I'm a mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
I know Excel, not much. My software programming is, almost non-existent. And, I think don't take this the wrong way. Sometimes lawyers are kind of like recruiters. You hate lawyers until you need one. And I'm not saying you hate recruiters, but some recruiters are just annoying and you don't want to be bothered with them until you need one. So if you have a good one,
Right.
such as yourself,
Thank you.
they're good to have in your Rolodex.
And you know what, Bert? I've heard that a lot. I have to say that, though I'm going to get off the subject and then get me back on it. I do hear that a lot. And
which specifically?
about oh, you're another recruiter. If one
Okay.
more recruiter calls me,
Right. Right. Right.
and the bad experiences that individuals have had with recruiters. Well,
Right.
one, just with my track record, I think that, maybe somebody has had a bad experience with me and I didn't recognize it.
Right.
But I try to have everything be a positive experience with the people I work with. And I think that does set me apart from many, many recruiters.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, in my very first week of recruiting, and I was hearing that a lot, not from candidates as much as companies. I said I was calling on,
Right.
and they're like, "Oh, you recruiters won't let up. You keep and
Right. Right.
or we had such a bad experience with the recruiter, we don't want to engage again."
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know how to respond to that, and I was talking to one of my coworkers who said to me, he goes, "Well, let me ask you a question. Do you like apple pie?" And I was like, "Yes." He's like, "Have you ever had a bad slice of apple pie?" I was like, "Sure." He's like, "Well, would that stop you from eating apple pie again?" And I was like, "No." He goes, "Well, it's the same thing with the recruiter.
Hmm. That's a good analogy.
Just because one isn't good doesn't mean another one won't be good."
Right. Right.
And so that's really stayed with me. This
Mm-hmm.
is a long, long time ago. And by the time you and I connected, not that I was that seasoned, but I was
Right.
already a veteran and had built up,
Right.
what
Right.
I
Right.
was glad to hear from Roger,
Yep.
a positive reputation
Yep. Yep.
nationally.
All right. So, is it primarily with engineers that you work with, or have you
Well, I
branched
have
out? Or?
expanded. I have, that is going to be a big portion of the work I do, but I have expanded outside and do handle other areas of employment that would include accounting and finance,
Mm-hmm.
and not in addition to engineering, and then marketing, legal, like corporate attorneys,
Right.
and operational management
Okay.
primarily. But I've had like a architectural firm that was a very good client of mine.
Okay.
And the principles of recruiting that I told to the principles of recruiting are very, very hard to master.
Hmm.
What makes a good candidate for a client? What makes a good person?
Yeah. Yeah.
And learning how to master that, once I did, it can transfer.
Right. So here.
To discipline, I can read up overnight.
Right. Right.
What makes a good architect? What makes a good attorney? What makes a good marketing, digital marketing manager, as an
Right. Right.
example.
Yeah, and the recruiters that bring good opportunities to me, I like. If somebody brings one that is pushing the envelope a little bit, I'm fine with that because they only know what I tell them, and so they all right. So
Right.
here's an 80% fit. Let's give this a shot. The ones that bring you the 10% fits. It's like there's engineer in the title. Yeah, but I'm not a software engineer, and I don't want to move to
Right.
California. So
Yeah, that is mystifying to me that you're getting that kind of call. But
maybe not that bad, but not. There's some that just aren't even close. But I probably told you the story, but I will share it again so people on the podcast can hear it. Earlier this summer, recruiter called me. I don't know where I first met her, but she had an opportunity at a company in Toronto. They were happy with it being remote, and I'll go there once or twice here or there. And I think it was a medical device, and I talked to them for a little while, and she described it, and after I had the interview, which I thought went okay, it wasn't great, wasn't terrible. I think I said to her, I'm not sure I could design a job fit much better than that one. And she said, "Oh, I knew it was great for you. I knew it was great. I knew it was a great fit." And, that's like Thursday or something like that. Monday, she gives me a call and says, "Well, Bert, I'm sorry, but they're not interested in you," which I was disappointed. And then further in the conversation, she said it wasn't a good fit. And further in the conversation, she goes, "Yeah, and this is my first time working with them, and they said they don't want to work with me anymore." And so it's like, Oh, so I was such a
Well, I'll
bad
say that's
fit. I
them.
was
I
such.
put that on them, not you.
Well, I do, but still, there's this part of me that says, well, I was such a bad fit that they hired or fired the recruiter. I said, well, that was a blow in my ego. I was,
No, I
and,
think that I have to say, of
but,
course, I don't know all the details of that, but that was not you. I
well,
have to say.
and after my emotions got in control, I definitely agree because, she said, well, they're looking for somebody that they want one person to do this job, and it was a rush job, had to be done in 4 months. And it's like, yeah, that'd have been a disaster because they want me to commit to doing something in 4 months without anybody helping me, without even knowing details of the job.
Yeah.
And so that was one thing. And just, the product they're working on, some sort of environmental, I don't know, plastic sort of thing. And I thought they had, the business seemed great. I was all for it, but what they wanted to use me for just seemed to not make any sense. So kind of.
I have to say, and I'm
Uh,
I'm sorry if that at all shook your confidence at that particular
uh,
moment,
just a tiny
but
bit. Just,
that's them. That's
yeah,
them. That's
yeah,
not on you.
definitely was.
But
All right.
I want to, we'll get to it, but I want to talk a little bit about how to position yourself for when you interview.
Okay. No, I
And
think it's a good. Let's segue into that. Some advice for engineering. Oh, anybody, I guess.
it's for
Going for.
anybody,
Yeah.
but ask me questions and we'll fill in the blanks a little bit as it relates to engineers. You know, I have to assume that was a call, that was a either a Zoom call or a Teams call if it was a remote position.
Yes, it was. It was.
But whether it is or whether it's in person, there are things you can do very early on, and not can do, should do very early on or very immediately, that I think sets the stage, and that is the magic 4 hello if it's in person, the magic 3 hello if it's online, and that is immediately put them to ease with a smile.
Yep.
And it is so great to meet you. And if it's in person, a firm handshake. And if it is, whether in person or on a Zoom call of sorts, make sure you're maintaining eye contact.
Right.
Not because that's the polite thing to do, which it is, but it connects with the other person. You're breaking down an invisible wall.
Right.
And it's very, very important because there is a wall. And if that wall can get broken down, you're connecting, and you're also doing something that somebody else may not be doing.
Right.
And so in any job you're interviewing for, I always say, pretend that 3 people at least are interviewing that same day. You're B. So let A not be, the one that does that, and B won't be the one that does, or C won't be the one that does it, but you as B, that's what you're doing.
Okay.
And when you're meeting in person, when I say the firm handshake, it's not an obligatory handshake, but a handshake that really provides some warmth, but again, that connection.
Yep.
And as engineers, something I've learned over time, and this is where you're unique because you're very outgoing and a real go-getter, and but sometimes engineers tend to be a little more quiet,
Mm-hmm.
a little less personable. Doesn't mean that they're not good people, because they are, but you've got to work hard to go against type.
Yep. Yep.
So if the expectation is that, okay, it's going to be somebody that isn't going to be very communicative, the more communicative you are, the more embracing you are as a candidate.
Right. Right.
Because it's a whole, in addition to the technical skill sets, it's a whole other skill set that just sets you apart.
Right. Yeah. Never have a second chance to make a first impression.
Right.
Yeah. And there's
right.
One engineer I've worked with. I haven't seen him in a while, and I'm not going to name names, but his handshake is so bad it's memorable.
Yeah.
And it's like, ugh.
Well, that you remember it like that.
I know.
That says it all. And that
Yeah, it's like I almost
But
don't.
anyway,
I almost don't want to meet him because I got to shake his hand. It's just
and that's but what I'm saying, that's
yeah,
just setting the stage
right,
for,
right,
the
right,
rest of the interview. But
right,
you're
right,
right. I mean, if the first handshake that's the very first impression,
right, right.
a person like that is now climbing up a hill that they may not be able to climb.
All right, so I'll let you give some more feedback or advice on interviews. I've got one thing I'll throw in if you don't cover it.
Go ahead. No, go
I'll
now,
start
and
with, all
then
right. So uh, this may have come from you. I'm not sure, but when you're at the face-to-face interview level, you've gotten through the
yeah,
HR, you've gotten through the hiring manager. You're meeting with 3 or 4 people, which is very typical in engineering interviews. It's sort of like it's your job to lose. The technical capabilities are largely assumed; they're just verifying. But a huge part of the interview is just personal fit. Can I work with this guy 8 hours a day or however often it's going to be? So last time, so when I interviewed for my previous job, and I shared this with the woman afterwards. So during the interview, was meeting with she was like the plant manager or some fairly high level person, and so I'm thinking, all right, so she's not really checking my technical things, just sort of a personality fit and yada yada yada. And so after 10, 15 minutes, we're like talking about her kids and my kids and stuff like that.
uh,
And I'm thinking, all right, I think we're connecting. I think this is good. And I'm thinking to myself, all right, so do I try to direct this back to somewhat more job related, or I just let it go off on the tangent that it's going off? And I said, we'll keep the tangent going.
okay. And what was the outcome?
Oh, I got the job.
Okay, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, I got the job, and no, and then I confessed to her that story on my last day, at the local pub. We were having a few beers, so that was just
Very okay.
that was.
Very okay.
I probably could have told her beforehand. I mean, she very nice lady. She even called me up a few weeks ago because someone I had worked with was retiring and invited me to the retirement for that person, which I thought was very nice. I'll say the company, it's Avery Dennison in Fitchburg.
Yes.
Great group of people to work with.
Yeah.
And, why did I leave as such a great group of people? Well, I
Mhm.
wasn't doing engineering anymore. I was doing mostly project management. So
Uh-huh.
if they ever came back and had more engineering to do, I would definitely consider that. So there you go.
I knew it was well, that part I didn't know, but I knew when you were at Avery Dennison what a positive experience it was for you, and that's great because sometimes things just fall into place, and both from the interview process as well as on the job, which is
Right,
always great.
right,
Unfortunately, life evolves, and sometimes you can't foresee what may happen down the road, well, like in your situation, but
right, right.
when it all falls into place, it's all great. But something, that you were saying that was good is that, and I don't know with the plant manager when you met her, if that was more just to get her seal of approval, or if it was more to have her input. But obviously, it was a good fit
Yeah,
because you were connecting.
yeah. I think it was a little
And,
of both.
and yeah,
I think the hiring manager probably had final say, but everyone had an opinion to offer.
but here's something I would say that I was going to say later on, but like in a case like that, which I do always recommend, that when you're talking with somebody, you make sure, no matter who it is, and even if it's just to get a seal of approval, that they understand from you that you are looking to be a positive contributor,
Mhm.
and your sense is that you would get along great with the hiring manager and the other people you've met, and that you could really bring value
Mhm.
to the organization and the job, or the
Right,
job and the organization.
right,
And if you're not using it in those exact words, which you don't have to, you just really want to make sure that no matter who you're talking to, that you're always leaving a message like that.
hmm
Because at some point, and maybe this was more relaxed, but not all of them are as relaxed as that, and maybe it wasn't as relaxed as maybe you think, and
right,
but it's at some point they're going to be talking like, what are your thoughts? What's your input? And
right,
you can be spoon feeding at least the message you'd like for them to take.
right. Right.
So if somebody is giving input, you can spoon feed them positive reasons
Yep.
that
So
they like you, and not just that it was, well, we just had great chemistry, because not everybody's chemistry is going to be
right.
great, you know.
Right.
But if you come across as somebody who wants to be a positive contributor, and that your sense is that you would be a good fit, you know, for the department, that you would work well with the people you met, with the product that you're working with, and will bring value to the company, that should land you an opportunity every single time. And if it doesn't, it's just that somebody was so much more on the spot, but you can't ever go wrong.
Right. I'm reminded of another interview, which was actually before we met and started looking for my job. I actually ended up at Becton Dickinson. So I was in Kentucky. My first year as volunteering, I worked what they called adult education, school on wheels, going to people's houses, helping them get GED and whatever else, which was very good. Decided to stay on for a second year, and there was another position I was interested in. And this is volunteers. I'm getting food, housing, and $50 a week or something like that. And it
Which, by the
was
way, I admire that you did that.
oh, thank you. And so this other position was they called it environmental education. There was a camp on a lake, and they had summer camp there, but they're trying to use it for stuff during the year as well. They wanted to take programs, science and environmental related, into the schools. And also at the same time, they had gotten a grant to do a leadership program. So I was interviewing for this position to do some of this leadership program work and some of the environmental education work. And so I was late 20s and had been an engineer for several years and just spent a year and change doing this teaching stuff. And I'm interviewing with the woman, my potential boss, and was very professional and arguably too professional. And she ended up deciding to hire me, if you hire volunteers. But she later shared that she had some hesitation because she said, I'm not sure he's going to fit because he's a little, I forget the exact word, but a little square, a little stiff or something like that. And so she told me the specific instance where her concerns completely melted away. It was before summer camp. It was, what do you call it, counselor week. So the counselors were training and setting up camp and doing all sorts of stuff. And so she was on the little balcony looking down, seeing what people were doing, just checking up on folks, and saw us doing some sort of icebreaker activity. And at some point, I was nominated to be we're making this little skit, and I was a sliding door. And so I kind of stood there, legs apart, arms up, sort of trying to be as much of the door as possible. And I think it was a swinging door, I can't remember. But when someone would come up to me, I'd kind of have to swing out of the way, and I'd swing back and forth, and I may have made sounds, I don't know. But she looked down and saw me doing that and said, oh, he'll be all right. He's not as stiff as I thought he was. So I had that subconsciously in my mind, or all those things kind of rolled into one, saying, okay, next time in a job interview, be a little more friendly, a little more personable.
Loosen up a little.
Loosen up a little bit, yeah. And so, anyways.
But I think the other thing that you want to do when you interview, and of course, everybody comes from a different point in their career. So somebody like you, this wouldn't be as pertinent as to somebody who is earlier in their career. And that is, obviously, you want to be respectful in the interview, but you don't want to come across like you're the subordinate.
Mm.
And you want to come across with confidence, with ease, and self-assuredness. And it can sometimes be as simple as if you're in an interview office and there's a picture in somebody's desk with what appears to be the family. It's like, oh, what a great picture. Is that your family? Just something that breaks the ice a little bit, or if somebody has a trophy or something, and just to really get conversation going, that you're not putting it all on the other side to do that. But then you don't want to get so off subject, but you also want to know what your accomplishments are and what you really take pride in,
Right.
and want to have that twinkle in your eye when you talk about that. So I would say prepare before you go in for an interview to really talk about what pride you take in your work and give examples of things that you accomplished, rather than start to have to think about it, on the spot.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
you want to exude, as I said, you want to exude confidence, you want to exude positive energy, and you want to exude a certain amount of assuredness.
Right. And just
Not
adding
being
on that,
cocky, but just assured.
yeah, there's confidence and there's cockiness, and one is
Right.
good and one is less good. But yeah, the knowing what those three things are or whatever they are, A is very important. B, I'll just add, being able to express it.
Yes.
People will often recommend, and I'm sure some do, practice that interview, practice saying that story. And I know just my, I don't know what psychologists would say about this, but I'll share it anyways. I know I love telling stories, and I tell them in my head many, many, many times, before, after, during, just because I'm practicing, I'm rehearsing it in my head. For better or for worse, I don't know. It's just what I do. And maybe that helps with job interviews. And I guess,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Because I would say almost have it down pat so that you're not stumbling over words.
right.
And much like you said, yes, absolutely rehearse it. In fact, I haven't said this in a long time, but I'm sure I told you this back in 1990, whatever. But
Six, yeah.
1906 is, talk to yourself in the mirror, ask
Yep.
yourself questions, answer it, and talk, look in the mirror. So you're, first of all, accustomed to maintaining that eye contact that I talked about, but two, that you have your story or stories and answers that you can easily get off your tongue when you're asked the question.
Right.
And because the first time you probably will be stumbling over words.
Mm-hmm.
But and you don't want to come across like you're, mechanical, but you definitely want to have it somewhat rehearsed so that it is very fluid
Right. Right.
and isn't like, let me,
Yeah, unlike this podcast, you can't edit that out so easily. Can we start this? Can
something,
I do that question over again, please?
yeah.
We're not recording the Zoom call, are we? Can we?
But
So,
I can tell you, and I had actually with mechanical engineer, I had a client, and they asked two questions that I thought were really interesting, but also really kind of, I think, did put the cancer on the spot, and that is, what are the three things you're most proud of,
right.
and what are the three things you're least proud of? And the head of engineering that asked that question was convinced that the third answer of the three things was the one that really was the most meaningful.
Hmm.
So it was both for what the person was least proud of and what they were most proud of. And if that question isn't going to be asked, it is going to be asked, what are your strengths and what
Right.
are your weaknesses? Or, what are your significant accomplishments? And know what they are, and where did you fumble?
So,
So I do want to say something
go ahead.
where it says about weaknesses, or what are you least proud of, or where did you fumble. That requires a lot of thought. And I got this from a professor in college who said that they know that's a ridiculous question and it deserves a ridiculous answer. So I don't know that I would go as far as say ridiculous answer, but I would say turn it around into a positive and make it something that is not so really significant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really hard on myself, or I'm a perfectionist, but I've recognized that, and I've learned, to really pace myself so that I will get everything done well, and it will be done perfectly. or I try to ease, but I need to know to ease up a little bit.
So I remember back when you were helping me get a job 26 years ago, that you said something very similar to that. What are your weaknesses is a bogus job and deserves a bogus answer.
Yes. Yes.
And I disagreed with you to some point. I felt that knowing your weaknesses is, knowing yourself. Everyone has strengths, everyone has weaknesses. And then before we got onto the podcast live, you had mentioned what are you most proud of? What are you least proud of? And you seem to think that that's a fair question. How do you see what are you least proud of and what are your weaknesses? How do you see them as similar or different questions? And is one better than the other?
Just say, I don't want to say one's better than the other. I can't control what somebody's going to ask, nor can
Sure.
you.
Sure.
You just have to prepare for it.
Mm-hmm.
And either way, it's a very similar type of question that you don't want to make it something glaring.
Right, right.
Because there are people who do, when you're not just a little bit guarded, you can say something that really gives the company interviewer a reason for pause,
Mm-hmm.
or a reason to not embrace you as a candidate.
Right.
As an example, somebody I sent on an interview said, they have a terrible temper.
Yeah, that's a bad one.
It is.
Yeah.
Or they're not organized.
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, I forget the specific example. It may even been in the process with you where I said something a little offhand, and I don't think it was a terrible thing to say. Obviously, I will really admit it wasn't the best thing to say, but I thought it was a minor thing, and not knowing where the interviewer is coming from, and they're kind of listening. As I said earlier, you sort of got the job already. It's yours to lose. So they're looking for disqualifying things, and that was potentially a disqualifying thing, which jumped out at them, and whatever happened.
Right.
But,
well,
I would call it.
I would call it. You're right. Like you said, it's yours to lose. Well, I'm not sure, but I would call it. You don't want to step in a landmine.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what that is. That is a landmine. So you do want to think about, what could potentially be something, that's not, I don't want to even say negative, but that's not necessarily positive about you.
Right.
But to turn it into a positive, that you've recognized that and you are working on it.
See, what I have done, because, as a engineer with 30-some years experience, I've interviewed people for positions numerous times.
Yes.
And I think a question I've asked probably more than once is, what is a weakness that you had in the past that you've improved upon, and how did you make it better? What do you think of that question?
That's a great question.
Yeah, because I think
that's a great question. Is a great question,
yeah,
and that's what everybody should ask. But as the person who is interviewing, if anybody is out there listening, just be prepared that you're going to be asked a question like that.
Right.
And even if it's not the follow-up that you ask, like, what do you do to make it better? If you're not asked that, at least volunteer what you did to make it better. So you're not leaving it, these are my negatives. And,
right. Yeah.
here's what
I'm doing to improve it. Right.
Yes.
All right. So the clock is flying by here. And I just realized a few minutes ago I forgot. The first question is on this Beers with Engineers podcast, because you are now an honorary engineer. Are you drinking a beer? And if not, what beer would you like to be drinking?
Well, I am not drinking right now, but I am. And I have to say, I have converted to the local microbreweries.
Oh, nice.
Locally. And while I have no favorite, I can go to any one of them and have a great beer. And that's what I'm drinking. And,
right. And I confessed, one friend of mine who I don't drink beer. And so it's odd having a Beers with Engineers podcast. And I didn't mention it in my first episode, and one friend of mine was very happy I mentioned it on the second one. But I will state that I am somewhat jealous of beer drinkers because this is a golden age of beer drinking. There's microbreweries freaking everywhere,
Yes.
and just there's this part of me just wish I liked beer because the idea
Yeah.
of trying different beers is very appealing to me.
Well, I'm not what I would
So,
call a big beer drinker,
sure.
but I really love these microbreweries and the
Okay.
beers there, and that's where I'm like, we'll meet either friends or
Yep.
even
So
you know,
lagers, IPAs, stouts. What's
yes,
your
yes,
all the
IPA,
above?
yeah, well, all the above, but IPA in
IPA.
particular.
Okay. All right. Let's see. All right. So that was my first question that I asked second last. So my last question is my grab bag question. So give me a second to get that
All
screen
right,
up here. All right. So the way this works is I've got a list of questions, and you will give me a number from 1 to 10, and then I'll ask you that question.
okay.
It could be
7
silly.
has always been my number.
7. All right.
We'll find out.
This segues nicely into what we were just talking about. If alcohol had no intoxicating effects, would you drink more, less, or about the same? Assuming no that
Oh,
tasted the same, yada, yada, yada.
okay, well, I don't know that anybody really cares for me what my answer is, but I would say I would do the same
The same.
because aside from the lasting effects, it still has a lot of calories, and
Oh, fair enough.
I'd much rather have dessert.
Okay. I've been asking that question of people for a number of years,
Yeah,
and the two most memorable answers were one guy said, "Oh,
yeah,
absolutely more," because he loves the beers. He's microbrewing. He's like this small, thin guy, weighs 140 pounds. He
uh-huh.
goes, "I can only drink two, and I'm buzzed already, so I would be drinking way more." And then another guy, it surprised me because he seemed to very much like the microbrews and all that stuff himself, and he said, "I wouldn't drink any. What's the point of drinking it?" It's like, all right, I guess. I thought you actually liked it. So anyway, so that was that. All right, so just wrapping
Can
things
I
up.
add one last thing?
I
Okay, can
was
I add one last thing for the interview?
I was going to
Um,
ask if you had one last thing. So now,
one
hey
last
Jeff,
thing,
you can
yeah,
ask one
yeah.
last thing.
When you are interviewing, and I've mentioned this before about talking about being the positive contributor and the value you can bring, but the very last thing you should do, anybody should do, is to positively reinforce your interest.
Yep.
Your interest not just in the job, but in the fact that you can bring value and that you would work well there. And because all of that, I think, is important, but nobody's going to know that you feel that way unless you tell them.
Mhm.
And that may not be, but it very well could be the tipping point that makes somebody want to offer you the job over somebody else.
Right. I mean, because often there will be multiple candidates, and
Right. I
often,
always say there are going to be, yes.
and I remember particularly a candidate we interviewed a few years ago, and we were all on the fence a little bit, and we said, all right, we decided to make an offer to him, and I think for the most part we were very happy that we made that offer. But there could have been one thing that he did that just would have, we fell one side of the fence. We could have fallen the other side of the fence. So try not to give him that one thing to put you on the wrong side of the fence.
Exactly. Or if it's down to two people, and you're trying to make a decision, it could be like, well, Bert has really been, more enthusiastic about
Right.
this,
Yeah.
and or has given us good feelings, and so that it's just a very, very good practice.
Okay. Just
And most people don't think about that. They don't think about it at all. They're already thinking about, well, do I want this job? Do I want, you have time to process later.
yeah, I'm sure I've been guilty of that. But yeah,
Yeah,
make the decision of if you want the job later in
you
the
have time to
interview.
process that, but at least leave a positive
Yeah.
impact.
Yeah.
And
So, all right. Well, Jeff, thank you very
that's
much
my
for your
parting
time.
words of wisdom, Bert. Hey, it
Awesome.
was
Awesome.
great.
And and I remembered. Let's give a shout out to your company name and email address and stuff like that.
Thank you. So I'm Jeff Turk, Omega Search Incorporated, and my email address is omegasearchinc omegasearchinc. That's OMEGASEARCHINC @gmail.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and anybody listening is welcome to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn, and I would certainly welcome that.
And if you're in the Charlotte area, you may run into them at a local microbrew.
Look at me for a microbrewery, and we'll have a beer with engineers night.
and you don't have to live in Charlotte to give them a call. So, excellent. Jeff,
you don't.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Bert. This was great.
All right, bye-bye.
Take care and happy holidays.
Likewise. That wraps up today's episode of the Beers with Engineers podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to like, subscribe, give a rating, and most importantly, tell your friends, whether they are an engineer or not. I'm happy to have them listen. Any comments and suggestions are welcomed and encouraged. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast or know somebody that you think might be a good guest on the podcast, please let us know that too. Until next time, this is Bert saying goodbye.